Hello and welcome to this latest edition in the webinar series for the NIHR supported clinical AI incubator. I'm Jeff Hogg, a clinician scientist at University Hospitals Birmingham. For those of you that have joined us before, you'll already know that the incubator aims to build a community of multidisciplinary researchers and practitioners to collaboratively progress responsible clinical AI innovation and regulatory science. We run a number of different events, but these webinars serve as the vehicle for us to identify challenging issues around clinical AI innovation, invite some guest speakers to share their perspectives and work, and have a discussion and ask questions about these issues to try and to understand things better together. So with that in mind, the form today is around a kind of half an hour presentation, then with plenty of time for Q&A at the end. So if I could just ask you to kind of jot down any questions you have as they occur to you in the Q&A at the end, at the bottom just there, then we'll dig into those at the end. But at that time, you can also use the raise hand function and I can bring you in and unmute you. So we'll look forward to that. Also, apologies in advance if I don't manage to get to all of those questions and comments, but this is a demand-led webinar series. So all of those thoughts are really valuable to help us think about our lineup and the kind of issues we want to talk about down the line. That'd be great. You may well have already noticed from the platform here that we're recording today's session. So if any of your colleagues weren't able to join us, we want to see later and look at things back, it'll be posted on the platform. And at the end, there'll also be an email address where you can share any other thoughts on topics that you'd like us to cover in the future. So it's a great pleasure today to be able to invite Dr. Andy Kale to speak to us. Andy's a clinical research fellow at the University of Birmingham with an intercalated degree in healthcare management and leadership. His research has involved a range of fields, including medical imaging, patient safety, and the use of artificial intelligence in healthcare. And his work on medical algorithmic auditing will be the focus of today's talk. And he's done a lot of work, as we'll see, producing these audits for monitoring AI in real-world practice, which in Birmingham has actually informed some operational decisions for real-world care too. So thank you so much, Adi, for taking time to join us today and share your work around this. And welcome you to share screen and go on camera. Thanks very much.
Cool, thank you. Thanks, Jeff, and thanks for the really kind introduction. So bear with me while I just pop my screen sharing on. Great, so hopefully that's visible. I'm just going to get rid of this bar. Great. So, hi everyone. Really nice to see so many participants at the webinar. My name is Adi. I'm a clinical research fellow at University Hospitals Birmingham and a doctoral researcher at the University of Birmingham. And today I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about AI safety monitoring and in particular the medical algorithmic audit, covering kind of a few example cases that we've been looking at in terms of AI deployments within our local hospital in Birmingham, but also kind of thinking more broadly about AI safety monitoring and what kind of challenges we're facing and what kind of what the next steps might be. I've got a few slides to go through. I'm going to be fairly flexible with timings just so that we can allow enough time at the end for discussion. So if I do kind of skip over any slides and you want me to go back to them, or you want to ask more questions about those particular bits, then please do fire away at the end. So without further ado, so what I'm going to do is just introduce the medical algorithmic audit and kind of why we're doing it, how we're actually using it in practice, and a little bit of key learning so far with some kind of anecdotal stakeholder perspectives. And then I'm also going to touch on what some of the next steps are, including what we're trying to do with the medical algorithmic audit as a framework, and how we're trying to, I guess, build it into a version 2 algorithmic audit framework, which takes into account a few things such as feasibility, how often we should be doing medical algorithmic audits, etc. So yeah, really keen to kind of hear from everyone at the end as well if they've got any particular thoughts. So why are we thinking about AI safety particularly, and why are we doing these algorithmic audits? Well, I just wanted to start with kind of the evaluation pathway for drugs and then compare that with AI as a medical device. So with drugs, we have a fairly, I guess, traditionally, we have a fairly established evaluation pathway where we start with preclinical trials. We've got the different phases of clinical trials from 1 to 3, and then we've got a period of pharmacovigilance where there is kind of predominantly a reactive process reporting through things such as the yellow card pathway in the UK, and kind of monitoring of adverse events broadly. Now, what we're seeing with AI in health is that there have been kind of a couple of studies talking about an evaluation pathway for AI in health. We've got in kind of broad terms, we might start with a retrospective study. We might then think about silent or shadow mode evaluation, and then we're seeing things such as the Decide AI reporting guidelines, which enable reporting of early live clinical evaluations, and then we can go all the way through to prospective clinical trials, such as a large-scale RCT. And then we have that period of a similar period of vigilance in the post-market surveillance stage. Now, the difficulty here is that actually there's no specific checkpoint after which these AR devices might become commercially available. So there was a couple of recent reviews that actually showed how devices are becoming commercially available at various stages in this evaluation pathway. So some devices have gone through a retrospective study only. Some devices have actually gone through prospective clinical trials and have kind of, I guess, prospective evidence of safety and effectiveness. So given this variability, what this means is that there can often be an increased burden of evidence for safety and effectiveness in the post-market surveillance phase. And so we need to be able to continue to evaluate these devices whilst they're being implemented and even once they are in routine clinical care. Now, AI systems will, as with all devices, AI systems will have an error rate and will fail. We are only just beginning to kind of understand what constitutes AI errors and harms. We've had fairly recent guidance from the MHRA around what constitutes adverse events relating to software as a medical device broadly. But I don't think any one part of the system can adequately detect and mitigate these errors. And so we need to think about leveraging the expertise across the divide between the manufacturers and the deploying institutions. And we are seeing that there is an urgent need to kind of establish methods for error detection, analysis, and reporting, specifically relating to software and AI as a medical device, although it's important to acknowledge that actually reporting for medical devices as a whole has been fairly problematic in the past. Now, before I go into the algorithmic audit, I just wanted to flag that we are doing some work to actually understand what the current situation is around reporting of AI errors and patient harms, including adverse events. And so we are doing two complementary systematic reviews, one looking at clinical trials and specifically randomized control trials as kind of the gold standard, although I do appreciate that there is some discussion around are RCTs actually the best way to evaluate AI as a medical device, given the kind of nature of how rapidly the development process can be. And then we're also looking at post-market surveillance in specifically some adverse event databases that are publicly available from a few different regulators. And so far we've actually found that in looking at the FDA list, we've found that we kind of put all 692 devices through the MAUD adverse event portal, and we found that 89 of them actually do have adverse events associated with them. Again, that FDA list has actually been updated, so we've got a little bit of extra updating to do. We've also looked at the Australian regulator, and we've found that of 120 software as a medical device adverse events, we've found that there are 13 AI as a medical devices which do have adverse events reported. And similarly, in the UK, although we don't have a publicly available adverse event database, we've started looking at the field safety notices. And so we found 10 AI as a medical device, AI devices with kind of field safety notices related to them. So just a quick plug here to say this is something we're looking at, so kind of watch this space. The medical algorithmic audit, what is it? This is an audit framework which builds on established algorithmic audit principles from engineering principles outside of medicine, but with a kind of much longer track record. And this was adapted for a healthcare use by Xiao and colleagues. And this is kind of really focusing on a six-stage process to allow us to audit the algorithm, understand what potential safety issues might or safety risks might occur, and develop the right mitigations to actually prevent patient harm at the end of it. And so this process starts at the scoping stage all the way through to testing, reflection, and post-audit activities. And I'm not going to go into them just yet because I have further slides to actually talk about what kind of tasks and activities we undertake at each stage of the medical algorithmic audit. So just to kind of introduce some of the use cases. In University Hospitals Birmingham, we're actually applying the medical algorithmic audit to 3 different use cases as kind of a start to see how the algorithmic audit performs, but also understand what kind of iterations need to be considered. So the first is in dermatology, and this is very much looking at the use of AI for triage of skin lesions after referral from primary care. We're also looking at autonomous generation of chest X-ray reports, and that's specifically for normal scans. So if the AI determines that a scan is normal, then a report will be generated. If it's abnormal, that will be flagged for a radiologist to report. And then we're also looking at radiology in breast cancer, so kind of the use of AI as a supporting reader in the detection of breast cancer. And this is kind of from left to right in order of maturity. And I'll come on to that in a second. In terms of the algorithmic audit, we are doing some mixed methods work focusing on undertaking some of these algorithmic audits as examples, understanding where some of the challenges lie, and really kind of putting the framework through its paces. We're then looking at launching an interview study. Having just done kind of the first couple of pilot interviews, I will be trying to recruit widely for this, and this is mainly speaking to anyone undertaking clinical AI safety monitoring, policies, policymakers, regulators, and also manufacturers to actually understand what kind of roles each stakeholder group could have in the algorithmic audit process, how often we should be undertaking these algorithmic audits, and also then thinking about feasibility. So how easy is it to do? How do we split the workload, and kind of how do you make sure that it's possible as an ongoing process? And then we're kind of going to wrap it all together with a co-design workshop. In terms of the deployment stages, as I mentioned, from left to right, we've got AI for skin, which is in routine clinical use. We've got AI for chest X-ray report generation, and that's at a pre-implementation stage. And then we've also got AI for breast, which is kind of pending further evaluation. So that's very much paused at the moment. I'm going to give you a whistle-stop tour through the actual algorithmic audit process. Again, I'm not going to dwell too much on each slide, but I can come back to it and dig into a few bits depending on interest. So the first step of the algorithmic audit is to really start with defining what the scope of the algorithmic audit is. And the way that we've approached that is to actually engage the different stakeholders within the hospital, and also speak to the manufacturers to understand stakeholder priorities and actually come up with an algorithmic audit plan, which can then be reviewed and tweaked by the different stakeholders. We then start, and this is probably one of the most important parts of the algorithmic audit, is that we start by reviewing the intended use specification technical files and really understanding what the boundaries and limitations of that device are. So, firstly, if it will be UKCA marked or CE marked if it's going to be deployed, but how is it classified? What's the role of human users? And the level of device autonomy, and are there any important exclusion criteria that we need to be aware of? So it's really thinking about what is the device regulated for. And then finally, we finish the scoping stage by further discussion with stakeholders to identify the intended impact of the AI model. So why have we decided that AI is the right solution? What is the AI actually intended to do? So what do we want to achieve? And is there alignment between different stakeholder groups? So is everyone kind of on the same page and aware of what the limitations are and what we're hoping to achieve? Then we kind of swiftly move on to the mapping stage, and that's split into mapping of audit delivery and then thinking about failure modes and effects analysis. So we went through and started by mapping out who we're speaking to throughout the process, who we need to involve. So that kind of splits into the audit team, some of the clinical staff, the AI developers themselves. So we have had interactions with CEOs, CMOs, and also post-market surveillance teams. And then we've also in UHB got a digital transformation team who we're very lucky to have, and they coordinate a lot of the operational changes and also procurement and engagement with some of these manufacturers. Then we really kind of focus on the resources, make sure that we have a clear idea of what we need at which stage of the audit. And then we move on to mapping of the healthcare task, the AI system, and undertaking a risk mapping exercise, which I will come on to in a couple of slides. We have been creating kind of swim lanes and pathway maps for the different AI deployments. Now, it's important to note that this is not something we start from scratch with. So there is documentation available. There's documentation to comply with relevant ISO standards, such as the risk management ISO standard. And then in the NHS, we also have the DCBs, so the NHS digital clinical safety standards, which are really important. So we do have those as a starting point, and then we can kind of simplify some of the pathways and also use those to inform some of our risk mapping activities. One of the important parts of the mapping phase is to really thinking about the AI system itself. Model cards is definitely something that we're pushing for. So when there's a deployment in UHB, we are asking for manufacturers to kind of engage with us and help us understand how the AI has been trained, what its intended use is, some of the kind of what metrics are being used to monitor the algorithm, and then whether there are any kind of previous evaluations that have taken place. And we are finding that through the algorithmic audit process, a lot of the stakeholders within our hospital have found it very useful to have everything in one place where they can kind of refer to. And so a model card is very much a slimmed down summary that can be distributed to all of the stakeholders interacting with an AI pathway, including some of the users, such as the healthcare staff interacting with this. And then we undertake our failure modes and effects analysis. Now, please don't try and read all of this slide. The reason I like to show this is that this is kind of an overview of what we do when we're trying to undertake a failure modes and effects analysis. So we start with kind of the process maps and break it down into the different clinical tasks that are taking place. And then we start thinking about what the role of the AI system is in each and every one of those clinical tasks, and then map out the risks associated with the use of that AI system for those the tasks that I've mentioned. Again, I just want to note here that this is not something that we start from scratch with. There is documentation from compliance with ISO standards, the NHS clinical safety standards, and so this is something that we kind of iterate. So this is something that we create using those in consultation with various stakeholders, and then this is something that can be iterated throughout the algorithmic audit process and the life cycle of the AI deployment. And then the right-hand side is really thinking of what mitigation strategies are already in place, and then whether there are any gaps that need to be considered, and that's kind of the final recommendations part of it. And this process really informs the testing phase and really informs how we're going about the testing of the system and identification of residual risk. We have also been doing similar process for AI for chest X-ray and also the breast use case. So I just wanted to mention here that we are looking at autonomous chest X-ray reporting, and we're actually undertaking algorithmic audits at the pre-implementation stage. So for the dermatology use case, that was very much the devices in use. How can we use the algorithmic audit framework to undertake a safety evaluation and then feed that back up to the senior decision makers? This one, on the other hand, is really thinking about, okay, we are interested in the use of AI for chest X-ray reporting. We have identified a manufacturer. Now we need to understand how that AI will perform in our local setting. And so we're undertaking pre-implementation audits in retrospective and silent mode, which will be kind of the next step. And we're looking at if discrepancies, and that's going to be the basis for our algorithmic audit. So discrepancies between the AI generated chest X-ray report versus a radiologist ground truth. So the next phase, so we've had scoping, mapping. The next phase of the algorithmic audit is artifact collection, and this is really the main kind of chance to bring all of the data sources and required documentation together in one place for the audit team to review. And here I've kind of just put in bold the fact that we are looking at NHS clinical safety standards, ISO standards, but then there's a lot of other documentation that is available either within the deploying institution, so the hospital in our case, or the AI developer. And we've had very good engagement from the developers that we've worked with so far. So we've had access to clinical safety reports, we've had access to intended use technical files, and I think it's been really, really helpful to actually have sight of all of that to identify potential gaps and also inform the next stages of testing. What we've also found from kind of anecdotal evidence so far is that quite a few stakeholders have really appreciated this being brought together and some of it summarized in the algorithmic audit to have one report that flows from start to finish. And that we're told has been very helpful for decision making in terms of the kind of future of said deployments. So testing. So the testing phase of the algorithmic audit is split into 3 stages overall. So we first look at kind of the overall performance of the AI as a medical device. That's something that we have done independently, and we have also done in kind of collaboration with device manufacturers. So the exploratory error analysis is very much starting with kind of error auditing directed by previous stage of the framework. So trying to identify potential patterns that might give rise to failure modes. So it's really thinking about, are there any specific scenarios or types of images that cause the algorithm to fail. We also look at subgroup testing, so we consider some patient-specific subgroups and task-specific subgroups, and I'll come on to that in a bit more detail on what those mean. And then I've also got adversarial testing on here. That's not something we've explored in as much detail yet, but it is definitely something we're interested in undertaking to kind of understand what the role of adversarial testing is. Adversarial testing is essentially a formal what-if analysis, and so this is something where we try to cause the algorithm to fail, and then we work backwards to identify why it's failed. So is there a specific feature in a set of images that's causing the algorithm to fail in those cases, or is it something else? And that's that can be quite useful when kind of diving down into specific subgroups or subgroups that we've identified in an exploratory error analysis. So just to talk about the exploratory error analysis in a bit more detail, I've kind of given you a brief overview. So we start by thinking about what's the overall sensitivity, specificity, accuracy. The metrics that we look at are very much defined in collaboration with the manufacturer and also based on any previous evaluations. And so that's why the artifact collection stage is very important, so that we have a good overview of what's been done previously. Then we also look at kind of error auditing, and that's where we have a set of images or set of cases, and we want to go through each one to identify, firstly, why the algorithm might have failed, and secondly, how we can then use that information to inform the next steps. And I will come on to those next steps in a few slides' time. This was just a quick example of one of the error audits that we undertook with one of the dermatology AI, and that was in collaboration with the manufacturer. This was actually a lot of this process was actually led by the manufacturer, who have been very good with this kind of post-market surveillance work. But we found that there were some cases that actually should have been excluded from the pathway. Some were kind of performance issues where we couldn't really understand why the algorithm has failed. There were some where it was kind of an unusual presentation. So even the dermatology specialists thought actually this might have been missed by clinical teams. And then there were also a few cases where it was labeled an ugly duckling, where actually the skin lesion looked abnormal from a macroscopic appearance. So using kind of the naked eye, it looked abnormal. But then when you actually focused in on it with a dermoscope, it looked kind of normal, and that's what may have thrown the algorithm off. Another tool that we're using for exploratory error analysis, and this is for the kind of chest X-ray. This is for the chest X-ray use case. We're also putting together schemas for error auditing. So this is kind of a traffic light system that we've put together, and we've tried to link some of the different cases together using kind of we've tried to group them together, and this is to actually help some of the discrepancy auditing to try and understand why the AI generated chest X-ray reports might not align with the radiologist ground truth. And then once we've undertaken that discrepancy analysis, we'll be able to delve into some of these groups in a bit more detail. So the subgroup testing, so I've got a couple more bits on the algorithmic audit, and then I'm going to pause, stop for questions. So the subgroup testing, we look at patient-specific subgroups. So we have been identifying kind of demographic subgroups of interest, but then there are also task-specific subgroups of interest. So that might be a specific disease. So in the case of skin cancers, it might be a couple of different types of cancer that we are interested in, or it's actually thinking about something broader. So on the schema, we had scanner type as one of the subgroups that we're interested in. So is it kind of a type of scanner or an update that's been shipped to one of the scanners that's actually causing the algorithm to fail? So that's those are kind of important subgroups to think about. And then there is also this concept of what we can predefine. So all the subgroups that I've mentioned so far are kind of predefined subgroups that we're interested in. But then there are also post hoc approaches, such as clustering, to identify hidden subgroups that we might not have thought about otherwise. And then I've kind of got this little iceberg diagram to show how normally at the tip of the iceberg, you can see kind of what the manufacturer's claimed performance is. You can also start to understand what the local performance is overall through kind of local performance monitoring and clinical audits. But then there is also the predefined subgroup performance that we need to think about, that's often hidden under the surface pre-implementation, unless the AI manufacturers have specifically focused on that in their evidence generation process. There's also the post hoc subgroup performance, which is often beneath the surface. And then we've also got unmonitored subgroup performance. And through the algorithmic audit process, what we hope is that we can actually bring kind of that subgroup performance above the surface for us to review at a local level, but also thinking about how that might be done throughout the evaluation pathway at a national or even international level. And then we've also got these unmonitored subgroups that we might not be able to understand the performance for, but at least we need to know kind of what subgroups we're not monitoring. So what data are we collecting and what's the data that we aren't collecting and therefore can't monitor performance for. And then there are a couple of hypotheticals that I just wanted to throw in there. And actually, I am kind of still developing this. So ideally, eventually, I'll have kind of a list of hypothetical situations. I will be sharing some of the non-hypothetical scenarios at some point, and hopefully that will be in kind of a published format. So for the skin AI pathway, for example, if we had a disparate performance between subgroups, we might start thinking about what our options are. Option one would be kind of a targeted pathway redesign. So we'd still retain the operations of that specific algorithm, and we'd start thinking about how do we redesign the pathway with a focus on those specific subgroups that are potentially losing out. We might also think about developer actions, thinking about retraining or threshold modifications, but we might also consider it, and this is a more drastic measure, we might consider retirement of the device and procurement of an alternative, or even reversion back to a non-AI pathway. Likewise, if we had chest X-ray performance decline, sorry, chest X-ray AI performance decline specific to a scanner type, we might thinking about review of those scanner updates, involvement of imaging teams, but also we would want to keep in the back of our minds that kind of retirement of the device and identification of alternative pathways is always on the cards, and it's often kind of, I guess, a sunk cost fallacy, trying to understand at what point should kind of the use of a technology, any technology, including AI, be suspended and kind of an alternative be procured. I think the one thing that I did want to mention here, and that kind of Jeff and I have been having some discussion around, is this whole process costs quite a lot of money and should potentially be factored into some of the cost effectiveness evaluation, because often we might do a back of the envelope calculation to identify how much money we'd save if we moved to an AI pathway, but actually there is a lot of money that goes that needs to be factored in when it comes to monitoring, making sure that we've got a plan B to revert back to if anything goes wrong, and then also thinking about reprocurement costs, etc., if needed. And that's not something that's often specific to AI. That's kind of that applies to all medical devices, but it is something that we need to think about when we're considering kind of cost effectiveness. Just to finish, so the last part of the algorithmic audit is kind of the reflection and post-audit stage. Part of that is designing risk mitigations. So we're kind of ensuring that we've got an error log for continued review. We're thinking about ground audit frequency and how we're collecting ground truths for the audits. But then there's also developer actions, and so we've had really good engagement with the developers to kind of discuss what they can do to help us in the hospital, and also ensure that the performance of the pathway as a whole is what it's meant to be. And then there's obviously the clinical actions such as pathway redesign that I've mentioned, review of device autonomy, which is something that we've been in discussion around with kind of some of the senior leaders, and then also thinking about education and training of staff when it comes to some of those specific AI pathways within the hospital. And then the last bit I just wanted to mention is we are engaging with a few different bodies. We've worked very closely with the MHRA, and we've also co-hosted a workshop at the CQC, trying to understand how some of this learning can be shared nationally. So Once we've done the algorithmic audit, the hope is that it doesn't sit in a silo. Actually, it can be shared. So if there are other institutions deploying similar or the same algorithms, then at least there is some learning that they can take away and think about how that might look in their local setting. So I've mentioned the evaluation pathway for AI as a medical device. What I wanted to follow up with is that actually algorithmic auditing can be done at any stage in this evaluation pathway. And so again, it's up for debate how much or what stage of evaluation is needed before an AI medical device comes onto market. But potentially doing kind of undertaking an algorithmic audit at various stages in this process will help us inform the real world deployment and monitoring, and actually contribute to more proactive vigilance rather than reliance on reactive vigilance. And then just to finish, so some of the key learning and next steps. So what we found is that in principle, the algorithmic audit framework could provide safety assurance to key stakeholders. We've circulated audit reports internally. We've presented to kind of clinical safety group meetings, and kind of some of the decision makers have actually been using our algorithmic audit reports to inform the next steps for various deployments. We've also found that components of the algorithmic audit are already being undertaken either internally by device manufacturers or by the deploying institutions. And so we don't need to start from scratch, which is always really helpful. However, there is some variability in the support that's being offered by various device manufacturers. We've been very lucky to be working with very engaged manufacturers in UHB, but actually we are aware that there is variability. Some would offer extensive post-market surveillance packages. Some will say, here's the algorithm, have fun. So what are the next steps? We are undertaking further case studies of the application, of applying the algorithmic audit. Importantly, we're exploring the feasibility, responsibility, triggers, and structure of the algorithmic audit, and that's through the interview study that I mentioned. And we're also trying to understand how to share some of this safety data and learning through feedback mechanisms. And I guess if there was one takeaway that I'd want to finish on, it's really to say, I think a lot of this process does need to be proactive. We can't let it be solely reactive. And that's kind of where I'm going to leave it. So I'm happy to take any questions. So I'm going to hand over to Jeff.
Thanks so much, Adi. That was really clear. And it's very complicated but important tool. Thank you for walking us through it. I'm looking forward to picking up on many of the interesting points there too. And we've got a question already, but just for the audience, whilst you're thinking it over, I'll aim to unmute you, but if technology lets us down or you're unable to speak to your question, then I'll read out what's in the Q&A. So first, I'll hand over to Ben Wilson, if that's okay. Thanks very much for your question.
Hello.
Thank you.
You can hear me okay?
Yes.
Cool. Well, thanks ever so much for the presentation. That was really interesting. And I've got a couple of questions. The first one was like, is some of the material available? Can I quote it and cite you, use it and reference you? If it's already available out in public domain, that'd be really useful. I've got a couple of other questions in there, which I'm very happy for you to answer offline or now. But I'm really interested in seeing how what you're describing clearly is working on three different levels in imaging technology, and the potential for AI clinical support to become useful in contexts other than just imaging is quite significant. And I think that what you've laid out as the algorithmic evaluation process would be just as applicable and just as useful in the way that you brought the elements together and described them. So I'm wondering whether there's some value in inserting at the earlier part of the process something that establishes, first of all, not just what's the model card and the level of autonomy, but also what's the mode of interaction between humans and the machine. So I deviated from anything I've written down, sorry, but there's the question.
No, yeah, thanks for that. No, yeah, really, really good points. So the first thing is, yes, more than happy for you to use that slide. Some of it is actually published, so I've kind of adapted that from there's the Decide AI reporting guideline by Vasey and et al, and that's got a really nice evaluation pathway diagram. And there's also the Salient framework, which is recently published, I think end of 2023 potentially. I'll try and pop those in the chat a bit later for everyone to have a look at. So yes, more than happy for those for any of that to be used, including my adaptations. The second part of your question around image, I guess diagnostic use cases from medical imaging versus other use cases. I completely agree. We're seeing that the most commonly used AI devices are for diagnostic use, but absolutely we're seeing that AI can be used for clinical decision support as well, and even many therapeutic use cases such as closed loop AI-enabled closed loop insulin dosing, or even mental health chatbots. And those are various use cases that we're coming across in the two systematic reviews that I mentioned. And so I guess yes, in the future, I think it'll be important to note during that scoping stage what the mode is. So what's the intended use of the device, and is it for diagnostic use, therapeutic use, prognostic use, and what are the implications? So yeah, I'm just agreeing with you here. I have nothing more intelligent to say than that. But yeah, thank you for the comment.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Next, we've got a question from Peter, picking up on the interesting comment you made around what the right form of evidence or what the best form of evidence is. So I'll just bring you in, Peter. Over to you.
Hi there. Yeah, thanks, Addy. I really enjoyed your talk. Yeah, it's interesting what you said earlier on around sort of AI RCTs and how you're talking about maybe they won't be the best approach because of the fact they take so long and how quickly the field is changing. So I was sort of wondering where you saw those, and in particular in relation to AI audit.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's a really good point, and it's an interesting discussion. I'm not sure where I sit yet. I think I'm still more an advocate for clinical trials, including RCTs, because obviously they're randomized. We can do our best to minimize biases. We can actually well, reasonably robustly identify an effect size and compare the AI arm versus the non-AI arm. But clearly there are issues with the use of an RCT for software and AI, which actually, by the time you finish the RCT and reported it, you might be already kind of 3 or 4 versions down the line with an AI medical device. And so I guess at the moment, that's why there's some flexibility in kind of what level of evaluation is needed before these devices become commercially available. That's not to say that's the ideal situation. That's just how it works at the moment. I think that where the algorithmic audit process could come in use is having that fairly consistent story going across the different types of evaluation. So you could see a world where you've had a retrospective evaluation, you've had a silent trial, but you haven't had anything more, but you're still thinking about deploying that device in your local setting in your hospital. And so you might be able to learn from that consistent algorithmic audit story and understand what the implications are at your kind of local level and put in place those extra risk mitigations during that peri-implementation stage. But yeah, relating to kind of, is RCT the best way to evaluate? Yeah, it's still an ongoing discussion. I'm actually very, very interested in it.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks so much. Really interesting.
Thanks very much. Next, we've got an important but challenging question from Robin Carpenter. So I'll just bring you in, Robin, if that's okay.
Hello. Hi. Thanks for that talk. Really, really interesting. I can't wait to follow where this goes. I was just thinking how this could potentially sit at that tension between academia and commercial, where in academia you follow the facts to the truth, whereas let's say the board of a limited company have to put the needs of a company first. And often the way that you navigate that is with legal frameworks something to protect the company IP, confidentiality clauses to protect the reputation, and obviously just say like data sharing agreements for the training data. So I was wondering what kind of legal framework you had to put in place and what kind of legal frameworks you imagine needing in future to scale this.
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. We have had a couple of discussions with kind of some of the lawyers on the I guess mainly academic lawyers. We thankfully so far we've actually had really good engagement with the manufacturers. So most of what we've done so far has all kind of been above board. We had really good support from the manufacturers. Obviously we haven't yet been in a situation where we're reporting extremely poor findings, a truckload of adverse events. That might change how some of the discussions go, but so far we haven't actually come across that that challenge. We have actually so everything that has been done has been kind of registered with the hospital. We've looped in the manufacturers at each and every stage. In terms of how this would look going forward, I think you're right. I think there would need to be some legal frameworks in place to actually publish some of this data in once it's kind of being used as a routine evaluation process, especially if there is a need to be transparent. So if the performance has been poor and we need to share that data at a national level, then yes, I do agree there needs to be some sort of process in place to enable that. That is something that we're in discussion with the MHRA about. We've also had some conversations with the CQC. We haven't quite figured out how that will work, but I think encouraging this culture of shared learning is really, really important. And so if you have any idea of kind of some of the legalities around it, I would be all ears, but that's definitely something that we will be exploring.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Thanks so much for all these questions and comments. Do keep them coming. I just thought I'd step in, Aditya, and ask what your perspective from your experiences of what good looks like, what the kind of aspirational state is for monitoring or algorithmic auditing. And I know those are questions you're asking and working on, but just to see what your current thoughts are.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so there's a lot of talk about continuous monitoring using statistical approaches, automated approaches, putting kind of dashboards in, and I think those are really important. I think that should go hand in hand with a defined audit strategy. So I guess you can't really use one or the other. If you were to use just continuous monitoring, you might be missing out on error identification. You might be missing out on kind of robust ground truth collection. If you were to just use an audit strategy, you might find it unfeasible to do kind of regular monthly audits or even weekly audits. So I think some combination of that is an ideal situation. The other thing to say is that I guess it's always thinking about that plan B. So what does the non-AI pathway look like? If there is a problem with the AI-enabled pathway and actually we're seeing more adverse events, we're seeing more errors being generated, then is there a plan B to go back to? And I think that's really important to consider. And I know that we've had some discussions around is it that we kind of leave a non-AI pathway in place and put a certain sample of cases through that pathway to benchmark, but also make sure that we have something to go back to. So I guess in my head that would be potentially an ideal situation, but we're some way off that at the moment.
And thinking from the kind of a doctor perspective, what kind of resource or personnel, like, is this a staff group that should be charged with this, or is it about bringing certain people together in an organized way, or how do you think that works on the adopter side? I know there's stuff to be done by the vendors as well, but it sounds like there's quite a big adopter piece there too.
Yeah, no, yeah, definitely. I think I always say that this should be a collaborative safety monitoring approach. So it shouldn't really be kind of one stakeholder group. It does need to have buy-in and kind of comment from all stakeholder groups. I think the manufacturers will always know their algorithm best, but the deploying institution, the clinicians, the kind of operational teams will know the local setting best. And so it's that combination of resource and expertise that's really important to allow some of this to happen, and actually to allow it to be feasible. So splitting this workload using stuff that's already happened, that's really important. I think the last thing I'll mention here is that we have undertaken a few algorithmic audits for the same use case, and we found that doing that first algorithmic audit was far more time consuming than the subsequent audits. And so it's putting that infrastructure in place to allow that continued and iterated audit process to take place.
Yeah, that's encouraging to know that you kind of build on the foundation you lay. We've got another question from Mark Jones, digging into that kind of aspirational angle. Could I just bring you in, Mark? I'll just unmute you. Thank you. It should be good to go, Mark. Well, maybe it's proving tricky on your end. Mark was just asking, if you did this presentation in 5 years from now, what would you like to look at?
Yeah, I would love for every algorithm to be 100% accurate and for us to just not think about any of this ever. But in the meantime, I think as I said, I think having clearly documented and transparent approaches to monitoring for every deployment. So having a clear understanding of what the manufacturer offers, whether there are any continuous monitoring approaches in place, and what the audit frequency should be. I think having that documented and for all stakeholders to be aware of that process from the outset would be absolutely amazing. I think it would be brilliant for this kind of idea of shared learning to be prioritized. So we should have publicly accessible adverse event databases. We should have registries for safety evaluations to be uploaded and shared. So if I don't know, if a trust in Scotland was about to deploy an algorithm that we're using in Birmingham, there should be somewhere for those deployers to actually visit, for them to digest, and then potentially to kind of actually have a conversation with an NHS trust who's actually been using the algorithm. And then I guess in 5 years' time, I'm hoping that I can be saying we've minimized our reliance on reactive processes. We're now thinking about proactive processes, and that's probably the most important thing for me. So yeah, that's me in 5
Great
years.
step forward.
Yeah.
So a last question for me, if that's okay. You touched on adversarial testing, which I think sounds really interesting and important. And I just wanted to hear your thoughts on kind of the practicalities of how that might take place, how kind of demanding that might be from a technical perspective. Are those expertise we could expect a provider to have, or how do you see that playing out?
Yeah, yeah, really good point. So adversarial testing generally is kind of a formal what if analysis. So we try and cause the algorithm to fail or break the algorithm, and then we work backwards to identify why that's happened. There is a degree of that like natural adversarial testing in practice. So you'll have poor image quality, you'll have I don't know, the wrong scanner being used, the wrong scan type being undertaken. So there will be some element of I guess usability issue or natural adversarial testing. I think when it starts to become quite useful is things like if we've done an exploratory error analysis, we've identified a certain a potential pattern, and we want to create a data set and use that data set to do an adversarial test for said algorithm. I think that's quite helpful because we can actually do some targeted testing and then work from there to understand why the algorithm is failing. The other thing to I guess highlight is that often when we're doing subgroup testing, the sample sizes become very small very quickly, especially when you're thinking about intersectional subgroups. And so adversarial testing might also be another opportunity to create a specific data set to actually kind of target subgroups that we are interested in. I think there could be quite there could be quite great utility in this, but clearly there would be some thinking to do around the feasibility of curating data sets and the actual expertise contained within a hospital trust. But manufacturers can actually enable some of this by providing kind of a what we call a black box audit system. So it's an online portal where institutions can kind of put example scenarios or cases through to actually see what the output would be. And that's normally available through kind of a dummy system, for example. But yeah, I think the feasibility will probably be something of a barrier.
Thanks, Andy. That's really helpful. And thanks very much for taking us through all that today and sharing your thoughts. Really, really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. And yeah, some really great questions.
Yeah, and we'll be sharing that recording online with some pointers to it coming out in the newsletters in the weeks to come. And just a heads up for everybody for next time, because of conferences and leave and a few things, our next monthly webinar is actually 2 weeks away. So on Monday, 8th of July, please do join us if you can for a talk from Dr. Kavitha Vimalasevaran on her experiences from the ACCEPT study, which takes this conversation around evidence generation forwards as well. This is a large multi-centered prospective study around AI-enabled CT triage. So yeah, more details of that to come. And thanks very much again to Adi, and thanks very much to all of you for joining us today and contributing questions. And we look forward to staying in touch and seeing you at future webinars.
Cool. Thanks for having me.